Yeah. Yeah. So let's start with sorry, Jenkins today. So Jenkins is very important. Without Jenkins, you can't expect any DevOps engineers. Okay, right. So firstly, what is Jenkins? Jenkins is for continuous integration and continuous deployment tool. Okay. So I think we know what is continuous integration. I guess I think everyone, or else let me explain it again. Okay. See, continuous integration means whatever the code developed by the developers, okay, and they push the source code onto the repository, and that code has to be built automatically. That code has to be built automatically. But why do we call it continuous integration? Because developers they do the source code development every day. So every day or every hour, whatever. So they do it continuously or frequently. Okay. So whatever the code has been designed and whatever has been pushed onto this repository, that code has to be built continuously. That is what we call continuous building. Okay. The code has to be built continuously. But where do we maintain the code? We maintain the code on a repository. The source code will be fetched from the repository continuously. Okay. That is what we call continuous integration. And deployment. So deployment. So if you want to do any deployment, for example, testers wants to test that application, and he wants to test that application. Then do the deployment of that application onto required servers and required environments, right? So that is what we call continuous deployment. But continuous integration and deployment part should happen automatically. Should happen automatically. Okay, that is the reason we have a tool called Jenkins. So far we have discussed repository tools and then build tools like SVN, Git, and then Maven. So we have discussed these tools. But every tool has its own purpose. But what we're going to do is we are going to integrate all these repository tools and the build tools into Jenkins. So whenever you integrate these tools into Jenkins, then the tools will perform their operations by triggering through Jenkins. Okay. Now, for example, I have an application. I want to build an application. I want to build an application. So how do we build it? Either Ant or Maven, right? We're using Ant or Maven, we build an application, right? Now, so if you want to build an application, we need these tools. We need build tools. Okay, but so far we have seen that we are using these tools and we are running these tools and we are running some commands. So that means we are doing kind of manual work, right? But if I want to build an application, what I do, first I integrate these tools into Jenkins. So whenever we integrate these tools into Jenkins, then Jenkins will take care of running these tools. Okay, what do you mean by running tools? So it is not going to running the tools, actually it is going to running the scripts. See, for example, we have a build.xml file, or else we have form.xml file. So Jenkins is going to trigger these build files. Jenkins is going to trigger these files, and as we know that whenever the build file is triggered, what happens automatically? Application will be built and packaged. Okay, so whatever we have done so far, like the manual work, we are going to automate the entire work by using Jenkins. Then why did we go through those tools then? The reason is, see, if you want to make these things automated, we need to integrate those tools into Jenkins first. That means you need to have some idea about the tools. So without having knowledge on those tools, you can't work on Jenkins. Okay, so first of all let's try to understand Jenkins architecture first. After that, we'll see how do we integrate these tools into Jenkins. Okay, right. See, the session whatever we're going to have today, so this is very important session. Just try to concentrate the entire theory part. So this is and the entire theory part today. Okay, so in this session I'll be explaining how the Jenkins works. Okay, and what are the things we can automate it in Jenkins. Okay, just try to concentrate today's session. If you're able to understand this, okay, you can able to understand Jenkins. Okay, the architecture is very important. Firstly, architecture and the integrations are very important. Okay, right. Let's look into this. So you have a server. This is a server. Now, on this server, I want to install Jenkins first. This is Jenkins. So I've configured Jenkins on this server. Okay. Now, so once I configure Jenkins on server, what exactly the purpose of Jenkins? As I said, the continuous integration and continuous deployment. Right? Okay. Now, I have a remote machine here. I have a remote machine. Okay. Now, what I do from this remote machine, I want to access Jenkins first. From this remote machine, I want to access Jenkins. I'm accessing Jenkins now. Okay. Now, I can use Jenkins on my local system, right? So just say this is the user system, and he is accessing Jenkins through a web browser. He's accessing Jenkins through web browser. So this is a web browser. It's a web browser. That's a web browser. Okay. Now, how do we access the Jenkins through web browser? Yes, the same way. Okay. Like so far we have seen the Git, right? How did we clone? How did we clone the repository? The same way. The IP address, and then as well as next to it, what is that? The path, the repository path. Okay. The same way here, I want to access Jenkins. Then what I do here in the web browser, IP address, and then it is Jenkins. Okay. But see, Jenkins is a web application. So we have a file called jenkins.war file. So what is the web package for? It's a web application. So now we have a, see, Jenkins provides web application. Jenkins provides a web application. So kind of it's a package. Okay. Now we have a package available. So if you want to use a web package, what do we need now? So how can we access a web application? How do we access it? Through browsers, right? So we access the web application through browsers. We know that part. So that is the reason I'm accessing that application through a browser here. Okay. Now, but before that, the application should have been deployed on some servers, right? Application should be deployed onto some servers. What kind of servers? So that is a web server. So if you have a web package, if you have a WAR package, so that's a web package. So if you want to test, if you want to access your web application, you need to deploy your application onto a web server first. So first we deploy this jenkins.war file onto a web server, okay. Now, so the web server here we're going to use is Tomcat. Okay, this is, and we are going to deploy that onto a Tomcat web server. Okay, so I want to deploy first jenkins.war file onto a Tomcat web server. Okay, once I deploy that onto Tomcat web server, then we can access this application, Jenkins application, through a web browser. Okay, but here, see, look at here, this is a remote machine. It's a remote machine. So anyone can access this. Any number of users can access this, because see, always it is not needed that only we'll be having one user for Jenkins. We'll be having multiple users for Jenkins. So here, who works on Jenkins? Who are the users of Jenkins? Developers, DevOps engineers. So DevOps engineers are users of Jenkins, because see, who is going to design the continuous integration deployment part? Obviously we, right? So we will be the users of your Jenkins application, not the developers. See, developers are not going to do any part related to continuous integration or deployment. CI and CD activities must be done by the DevOps engineer. Okay, so this is not your developer or tester. Okay, so if you want, you can give access. That's no issues. But usually, the clients or users for Jenkins is DevOps engineers. Okay. So what Jenkins does, as we've seen that Jenkins continuous integration and continuous deployment path. Okay. Now, so how you are operating, how you are accessing the Jenkins application through browser. You're accessing the Jenkins application through browser. Okay. Now, so firstly, as we know that, so let's do some continuous integration and continuous deployment part. I want to do some continuous integration first. That means I want to get the source code from a repository. I want to get a source code from repository. Okay. Now, so if you want to get the source code from repository through Jenkins, okay, what we do first? First, we design a job. We create a job in Jenkins. Okay. What do you mean by a job? See, just look at these terms. The terminologies are very important. Okay. Now, job. What is a job? What job contains? Job contains some task. Job contains the task. Okay. So what is a task? What kind of task I want to go for? I want to go for continuous integration, CI. Okay. Now, firstly, I want to go for continuous integration task. So what you do first, if you want to go for continuous integration, or that could be any job. So that could be a CI activity or CD activity, whatever the kind of task it is. Okay. If you want to perform any task in Jenkins, you need to create a job first. Just create a job first. Okay. Now, so this is a job, right? Job is running at a task. Okay. Who is going to perform this task? Who is going to perform this task? Oh, see, that is the reason we have Jenkins. So Jenkins is going to perform this task. Okay, that is the main purpose of task of the Jenkins. Okay, Jenkins is going to perform this kind of task. But see, what Jenkins is going to do is going to trigger it. It is going to trigger this job. See, perform means what exactly perform? Execute the task. Right? That means it has to trigger the task. Correct? It has to trigger the task. So Jenkins is going to trigger your task. Jenkins is going to trigger your task. Jenkins is going to trigger your task. So once the job, see, whenever I say, yeah, just say job. Job will be triggered by your Jenkins. Okay. Now, see, Jenkins is going to just trigger your job, but is it going to run your job? No. Actually, it is going to run your job. See, we have a concept called. Now, just look at here. I'm just going to pause this as of now. I'll come back to this later on. Triggering. Okay. Now, in Jenkins, we have a concept called master-slave concept. Master-slave concept. Okay. So, what is a master and what is a slave? Master is nothing but, sorry, server. Yeah, that means your Jenkins. So Jenkins is your master. Okay. Then who is the slave here? Tools. No. Tools are not slaves. Tools are not slaves here. Slave is nothing but also a machine. It's also a machine. It's just a machine. Okay. So Jenkins, see, when I say master means Jenkins, right? Jenkins is also a machine, right? That's a server. That's a server. Client is also a machine. Okay. Now, so as we know that, what is the purpose of master? What master does? We have seen master slave concepts. Like, what is that? Correct. See, what master does? You know this part. Like, okay, we have seen in many concepts. Like, what is the master? What's the purpose of the master? Master assigns jobs to slaves. And what slave does?
To do the task.
Yes, slave execute the task. Correct? Slave is going to execute the task. But slave is also a machine. Look at here. Slave is also a machine here. Okay. So now this works on master slave architecture. This works on master slave architecture. So here I have one more machine. So just say this is a slave machine. It's a slave machine. Okay. Now, what slave does? Slave is going to perform your job. So what Jenkins does is Jenkins is going to assign jobs to slave. Jenkins is going to assign the jobs to slave. Okay. But what kind of job it is? Like continuous integration job. So this is a continuous integration job. Okay. Now, so what slave does? Slave is once the job is assigned to the slave by your master, then what slave does? Slave is going to run that job. Slave is going to run that job. Okay. Now, so whenever the job is done, then the source will be, since it's continuous integration, right? Since it is continuous integration, then the source will be fetched from that server. Source will be fetched from that server, and then the source will be available in slave on the master. Correct. See, only the purpose of slave is to run the job. The purpose of slave is to run the job. That's it. Nothing else. But the entire output, entire execution output, you can have it again. You'll be having it in Jenkins, within your Jenkins application. Slave only runs your job. Nothing else it does. It's only run your job. Okay. But you can find the source code within your, the output within your master. Okay. See, there are a few more things in this as well. But as of now, try to understand. You can find the source code. See, why I say source code? Because it is continuous integration, right? Whenever you do continuous integration, what happens? The source code will be fetched from the repository. Then, where do you see that source code? You can see that source code within your master. Okay, clear? Understand this part? What slave does? Slave just run your job, but it is not going to perform any other activities. Just going to run your job. Okay, so whenever the job is done, the master will fetch the source code from the repository. Okay, that is your master slave concept. Okay, now then see, whenever look at here, just now, whenever the job is triggered, the job will be triggered by your master. Job will be triggered by your master, and job will be run on your slave. The job will be executed on slave. Okay, so once the job is run, then the task will be performed. Okay, understand this concept? So this is your master slave concept. This is your master slave concept. Okay, so this is, so if you might have seen the questions whatever I have forwarded. I think it's not forwarded to everyone, only from the other batches, not for you. Okay, so in the document, the questions document, you see what is a master slave concept. So you can expect this question: what is a master slave concept, and what master does, what slave does. Okay, and after that, so once you explain this master slave concept, the next question you can expect is how do you create master, how do you create slave. Okay, so now let's look into that part. How do we create slaves, how do we create master? See, we don't create this master because we already installed this Jenkins, right? See, as I said, Jenkins itself is your master. Jenkins itself is your master. So you don't need to create your master machine. See, when I say master means that is your Jenkins, to be simple. Okay, master means that is your Jenkins. Okay, now we already installed this Jenkins. We already installed Jenkins. That means our master is ready. But how do you create these slaves? How do you create these slaves? Okay, so there are some options in Jenkins. With the help of those options, we need to configure the slaves. Okay, now, but see, as I said, slave is just a machine, right? Slave is just a machine. Now, so the machine can be either on Windows or else on Linux as well, right? The machine can be either on Windows or Linux. See, why I'm saying Windows or Linux means configuring slave machines on Windows is a different concept, and configuring a slave machine on Linux is also a different concept. So we need to follow there are some configuration steps. We need to follow those steps. So there are some different configuration steps. So you can have the Linux machines, sorry, the slave machines either on Windows or else on Linux as well. Okay. So whatever we discussed so far is what is the master slave concept and what is the slave, what is master, and then job triggering. Who triggers the jobs? Jenkins triggers the job. That means your master triggers the jobs. Okay. Then once it triggers the job, it is going to assign the jobs to its slaves. Okay. Yeah. But for example, look at here. I have some slave machines here. I have slave 1 which is on Windows. I have a slave machine, slave 2 machine which is on Linux. Okay. Then I have one more machine, slave 3. Again, this is on Linux. So I have 3 slave machines like this. Okay, slave 1, slave 2, and slave 3. Okay. Now, Jenkins is going, as we know that Jenkins is going to assign the jobs to slaves, but we have 3 slaves. So which slave is going to run your job? Sorry. Yeah. So master assigns the jobs to slaves. So based upon the master assigns the jobs to slaves, in that based upon that the slave will perform the job. But for example, this is offline. This slave is offline. Okay. Now, so we have 2 slaves online. We have 2 slaves online. So for which node Jenkins is going to assign the jobs? So we don't know this. Even we don't know this. So Jenkins is going to assign the jobs randomly. Jenkins is going to assign the jobs randomly to its slave machines based upon the availability. Based upon the availability. For example, we have slave 3 machine, right? We have slave 3 machines. This is offline. So offline means, so that is master is not going to consider that machine. Master is not going to consider that machine. But we have 2 machines online. We have 2 machines online. But to which machine the job is going to assign by your master? But that is done by randomly by your master. That is done by randomly by your master. Okay. For example, so just say this machine is already performing some jobs. Okay. Then the job will be assigned to the slave 2 because the machine is already busy. The machine is busy, so then job will be assigned to the other slave. Okay. So but we don't know where to which machine the job will be assigned and run. That means to which slave the job will be assigned. Okay. But is there any way that can we assign the jobs to particular slave machine? See, as I said, master assigns jobs to slaves. But how it is done? That is done by randomly. But can we control that manually? Understand? So I want to control that manually. You can control that manually. So whenever you create a job, so while you configure the job, right? Whenever you configure a job, what we're going to do is we're going to do some settings. In that settings, I mentioned that run this job only on slave machine 1. Then master will assign the jobs, oh, that particular job only to this machine, not to the other machines. Okay, so that's how you can control it. Okay, now, so let's take one more scenario here. Just say all these slaves are offline. All the slaves are offline. If all the slaves are offline, to which machine the job is going to be assigned? Sorry? Yes, that's correct. That is actually what is master slave concept. Okay, that is actually the master slave concept. See, for example, all the slaves are offline. All the slaves are offline. Okay. Now, so if the slaves are offline, and then I want to trigger a job. So whenever I trigger a job, okay, the master is going to assign jobs to its slaves, but the slaves are offline. Then will the job will be in pending? No, that won't be in pending. the master is going to take the responsibility to run the job. Okay, clear? So master itself is going to run that particular job. That's one more scenario. Okay, right. So just remember these parts. Okay, these scenarios are very important. So definitely you can expect this question as well. So whenever they talk about master slave concept, they'll give you some scenarios. Okay, I have some slaves, and all the slaves are offline. Okay, now all the slaves are offline. Then who is going to perform the job? Obviously, master is going to perform that job. Okay, now then one more scenario. For example, I want to run this job on slave 1. So as we know that we can restrict it, right? So I want to run this job only that particular job on slave 1. We can do that, right? Now, but what if this node is offline? See, I want to run this job only on this particular node, not on other nodes. But that node is offline now. See, whenever I say node or slave, that is a machine. Okay, that's your slave machine. Then the slave machine is offline.
The master too.
Master?
Yeah.
No, that is not going to happen. Master is not going to perform that job because you have put some restrictions that run this job only on that machine. So master is not going to run that machine, run that job, because we have put some restriction, right? So run this job only on this machine. Then no other machine can run this job. Now neither master nor other clients, other node machines. Okay. So then what is going to happen to this job then?
Offline.
Yeah, that will be in pending state. That will be in pending state until your slave machine comes back online. So once it is online, automatically job will be triggered.
Once the master going down and then the
Sorry?
master going down.
Yeah, if the master is offline, then your Jenkins is offline. Then there's no meaning of, so Jenkins won't be running at all, right? Jenkins won't be running at all. Then that is application itself will stop. Then you can't, nothing will be performed. Okay. Yeah, understand these scenarios. So anyway, we'll look into these scenarios. I'm just giving you the concepts of master slaves because we are discussing this concept as of now. Okay, so just understand these concepts, which is very important. Definitely, you can expect a question on master slave concept in Jenkins. What is the concept? What is the concept of master slave in Jenkins? You do not see. Don't just give one line answer. Just explain these parts. See, master is nothing but that's how Jenkins master, and slave is nothing but a machine where the Jenkins will perform the jobs. Okay, and how do we create this master? Do we create this master machine? No. Whenever we install Jenkins, that itself is a master. But how do you create slave machines? You need to create the slave machines manually. You need to configure the slave machines manually. Okay, and once master assigns the jobs to slave machines, slave is going to perform the jobs. And we can also restrict that this job can be run only on that particular machine. You can also do restriction. Okay, clear? So this is how the master slave concept works. So we are going to use a Tomcat web server. We're going to use a Tomcat web server, and we deploy this application. We deploy Jenkins.var application onto Tomcat. Okay, and so we have one more concept. Actually, we have a concept called labels concept. Label. Okay, what is a label? So label is nothing but it's a collection of slave machines. Collection of slave machines. Okay. So we know what is a group in Linux, right? What is a group in Linux? Some collection of users. The same way here, label means collection of slave machines. So it contains some slave machines. Okay. For example, I have a label 1. I have a label, just say some label 1. So this label, slave 1, or let's take slave 2 and then slave 3. So the label 1 contains slave 1, slave 2 and slave 3. Okay. Now whenever Jenkins assign jobs, see here, as I said, we can assign the jobs to a particular machine, or else we can assign a job to a label as well. We can assign a job to label as well. Okay, right. So whenever they assign jobs to a label, but the label contains
Yes.
two missions. Label contains two missions.
Only two.
Just giving an example, not two missions. Okay, that's collection of slaves. Okay, so label contains two missions. Okay, so here, but which slave is going to take the responsibility of running the job? Again, that is going to be done by randomly. But why I have created this machine? Why I have created a label? The reason is the two slave 2 and the slave 3 machines are on Linux. So that means they are having the same kind of configurations. They are having same kind of configurations. Okay, just say, or else let me give you the label. Here is as some Linux. Okay, and then I'm going to create one more label, some Windows. Okay, and to this machine I'm going to add some slave 1 and then slave 4. Okay, for example, I have a job. And the job runs only on Windows machines. The job only runs on Windows machines. Then what do? You assign that job to label Windows. Then I have one more job, and that job runs only on Linux machines. Okay. For example, so what I mean is, for example, I have a job 1. Just say I have a job 1. In that job 1, I have mentioned to run some commands. What are those commands? Like Windows, some Linux commands. Okay, some touch, so and so, some files. Okay, then some directories, some ls, someday. So these are your Linux commands, right? So if I assign this job to Windows machine, then will it be run? No, because these commands only your Windows commands, sorry, Linux commands, the shell commands. But I'm going to create one more job here. I'm going to create one more job 2. Okay, so here I mentioned some some commands, some Windows batch commands. These are Windows batch commands. Then if I assign this, job to Linux machine, okay, will the job will be run? No, that won't be run. So assign this job to this machine, this label, job 2, and then job 3. Job 1. That is the concept of labels. So we are going to look into this concept practically tomorrow. Not tomorrow, I mean next session, that's on Monday. Okay, so, and at that time I don't want any question mark faces. Okay, I'm not going to explain this part because I'm clearly explaining this part now, as of now. Okay, so please do understand this part. And so we are done with the master slave concept. Okay, so these are some scenarios we have gone through in master slave. So from this concept so far we discussed, just remember what is master slave and what is master, what is slave, and then what is a label and what is your slave, and then what is a job. Okay, what is the purpose of a job. Okay, just remember this, just understand this concept so far we have discussed. And now let's look into trigger. Okay, see, whenever I say automation, so for example, I want to run this job on some label, okay, that means on some slave machine. But so if you want to run that job, how do you trigger that job? See, whenever if you want to run that job, the job has to be triggered, right? See, or else, see, just take some build files. So we are seeing some build files. So that means we are running some commands. What does it mean? We are triggering that build file. So how do you trigger a file in and with the help of some commands? But the same way here, I want to trigger a job in Jenkins. Then what do you do? How do you do that? So first you configure the job. What do you mean by configure the job? So first, I mentioned some commands to run these commands on this. Let me take this part. So run it on some Windows level. Okay, so this will be run on so and so label. Okay, the job will be run on so and so label. What is the job about? To run some commands. To run some commands. For example, just say this is a command. Job has to execute it. Okay, the job has to execute this command, date command. Okay, now whenever the job is executed, it gives some kind of output, the date output. Okay, what is the date, today's date, and so and so, right? But how this job will be triggered, right? So we can trigger the job manually. We have some option to build now. Okay, there is an option called build now. So when you go to Jenkins, go to this job level and then trigger the job. You can trigger your job. Okay, or else, but since we are talking about automation, even I want to trigger this job automatically. Okay, so how do you trigger that job? Here we have got some triggering mechanisms. Okay, with the help of those triggering mechanisms, you can set up the job has to be triggered automatically. For example, I want to run this job every day in the morning 10 a.m. So trigger this job. The job will be triggered every day at 10 a.m. That is triggering mechanism. Or else, I want to trigger this job for every 1 hour. You can trigger it, but you need to do some configurations. You need to set up your configurations first. Okay. Or else, I want to trigger this job every weekend. Okay. Like so and so, you can set up some kind of triggering mechanisms. Okay, so that is very easy. So we have some cron jobs concept in Jenkins, like in Linux we have the same concept we have in Jenkins as well. Okay, so that is very easy. Now this is how you can trigger your jobs. You can trigger your jobs two ways. One is manually with the help of we have option called build now option in Jenkins, and the other one is you can trigger your jobs. This is automatically. You can automate it, but you need to set up some cron jobs, the time mechanisms. Okay. Now, so we know this triggering mechanisms, right? And we know what is the job, so and so. Let's look into how we do continuous integration, how the continuous integration happens. Now, for example, I have a machine, I have a server here. On this server, I have a repository. Okay. Now, this is my SVN repository. Okay, that's my SVN repository. Okay. Now, first I trigger a job here. This is my web browser. See, when I say web browser, you are accessing your web browser means that is only it's kind of a front end. Front end means only you just access it. That's it. But that means internally again it is having some backend application. Okay. So look at here. This is a web browser. Okay, I'm a DevOps user. I'm accessing Jenkins application through a browser. So this is a browser. That's a browser, web browser. Okay. Now, so here, but where the web, so we access Jenkins through browser. Okay. Now, but before that, you should have installed Jenkins, right? So this is your Jenkins server. This is your Jenkins server. So we're accessing through browser from the front end, and which is connected to the back end. Okay, so every operation you perform within your browser, that will be saved on your application, on your server. Okay, everything. For example, if you create some job, the job will be saved on your Jenkins. That's in the backend. See, see, we are accessing Gmail, right? How we're accessing the Gmail through browser, but where the information is saved on your server. The same concept works here. Okay, that means through browser you just accessing that application. That's it. Now, so for example, here I create a job call for continuous integration. For continuous integration. So continuous integration. So by whenever I trigger this job, whenever I trigger a continuous integration job, okay, what should happen? The source code should be fetched from the repository. Source code should be fetched from the repository. Okay, but where is our repository? On this server. On this server. Okay, so server is having some IP address, right? We know this part. Like, do you remember in SVN, how do you check the repository data? Through browser. Through browser. Okay, just copy that URL. Like what we do whenever we check out, right? Whenever we do check out, what we do? SVN checkout and then the URL. The same way, get the URL, get that your repository URL. Once you get the repository URL, then what you do? Within this job, while creating this job, while configuring this job, what you do? You just copy and paste that URL. This is SVN URL. That is your SVN repository URL. But what the URL contains? The IP address and then the path, repository path. Then what the job does is, the job is going to fetch the repository data, fetch the data from the repository, from SVN repository. Okay, and then the data will be available within your Jenkins. Now here you can see the data now. So here the job, right? See, this is the job. The job, okay, within the job you can see some data. What data it is? Your source code, your project data. Understand? So whenever we trigger this job, the source code will be fetched from the repository, and then you can see the data within your Jenkins in the job. Okay. So how frequently you want to trigger this continuous integration job? See, that's a continuous integration job, right? So that means developers frequently do the changes to the repository. Developers frequently do the changes to the repository. So obviously we need to get the data and start building it. We need to get the data and start building it. Okay. But how frequently you get the data from the repository? Now here comes triggering mechanisms. Okay. Based upon how do you trigger your jobs? Like how frequently you want to trigger your job? For example, if you trigger your jobs twice in a day, morning and in the night, then what happens? This job will be triggered. This job will be triggered and it fetches the source code from the repository. Then start building it. So, but how do you build it? We are not gone to that part yet. We are just looking into only getting the data. Okay. So once we get the data, you can easily build it. That's a different part. Okay. Now, or else, I have one more mechanism. Okay. What is that mechanism is? Whenever the developers save the source code onto this repository. Whenever the developers save the source code onto this repository, then what should happen? This job should be triggered and fetches the source code from the repository. Clear this point? So whenever the developers save the source code onto the repository, so here we have the development team. Look at here, we have a dev team here. What developers does? They save the source code onto the repository, and whenever it is found that some changes happen on the repository, automatically the job will be triggered. This job will be triggered and fetches the data from the repository. Okay, so we have these two important mechanisms. Okay, one is on time basis. One is on time basis, other one is on changes in repository. Okay. Now, but here we are talking about SVN repositories and so and so. And once, see, if you want to use, if you sorry, so if you're Jenkins, see Jenkins, firstly Jenkins does not understand what is SVN, what is AND, what is Maven, or what is Git. Jenkins does not know these concepts. Okay, does not understand these tools at all. Okay, see Jenkins is just a platform for us. It's a platform provides you to build your jobs, to create your automated jobs. That means DevOps automation process. Okay, but how you're using SVN or Git or whatever tools in Jenkins, how we able to use it? Because see Jenkins is a platform. It is not going to understand what is SVN and what is continuous integration, right? But how Jenkins understand these tools? So here, what we do is we need to integrate these tools into Jenkins first. For example, I want to use Git. Then what we do? Integrate and Git tool into Jenkins. Integrate Git tool into Jenkins. Okay. Now just say Git now or SVN whatever. So first integrate this into Jenkins first. Then you can start using Jenkins. You can start using Jenkins. But how do we integrate these tools into Jenkins? That is, here we have a concept called plugins. Plugins. So I install SVN plugin. For example, in the future, I want to go for Git. Then what I do? Plugin. Which plugin? I want to go for Git plugin. Okay. I want to go for Maven. Then plugin name is Maven. So like this, you can integrate any plugin, either Ant or Maven, or else we have some other plugins as well, like backup plugins and so and so. So we'll see that some role-based plugins. But the plugins concept, this is the plugins concept. Plugin is nothing but it's kind of a third-party tool. If you want to use that, you need to integrate the plugin into Jenkins. Then you can start using it. Okay, right? So this is a kind of an overview what we are going to discuss in Jenkins. So we have a few more concepts, but before we start Jenkins, you have to understand these concepts. Okay, then you can easily proceed with Jenkins. Okay. So first we have seen the master slave concept. That's the first part we have seen. In the second we have seen the triggering mechanisms. Okay. So how can you trigger the jobs? Okay. But if you want to trigger this job, make sure you understand firstly what is a job and what do you do in a job. Okay. Right. See, there was even you can expect sometimes a simple question. You can expect sometimes some simple questions as well. What are the questions are? How do you create a job? How do you create a job? That's very simple. It's a silly question actually. So what they're expecting you from your side is they're not expecting you that click on this option then you can create the job. No, they're not expecting that part. They're expecting more than that. They're expecting that how many kinds of jobs you can create. That is what they're expecting. So we have some types of jobs like freestyle job, Maven job, okay, some build pipeline jobs. So that is what they're expecting. Okay, so everyone knows that. See, we have an option when you go to Jenkins homepage through browser. There you have an option to build, to create an item. Whenever you click on that, you can create your job. Let's see, everyone knows that part. But they're not expecting that. They're expecting more than that. They're expecting that how many types of jobs you can create. Okay, so but if you do practice, then you can understand everything. See, I say this in almost like every batch and every student that so do practice it. That is the only way you can learn DevOps. Because we have so many tools. We have too many tools in DevOps. So if you want to answer every tool question, then you need to have some practice. At least you need to have. See, we will be having about 45 to 50 day sessions, and do practice it every day. And even once you finish this course, even after that, do not stop practicing it. Do practice it every day. Otherwise, you miss the flow. Okay, right? Yeah. Any questions on this so far today? Understand this concept, right? If you understand this concept, in our next session, we'll proceed with installation part. We proceed with the installation part. So we'll install Jenkins, okay, and then that means we install master, and as well as we configure slaves as well. We configure slaves as well. But if you want to install Jenkins or if you want to configure Jenkins, you need to have Tomcat server as well, because we deploy. See, that's a Jenkins is a WAR application. Jenkins is a WAR application. We deploy that onto some web server. So you need to have Tomcat server as well. But now, so can't we use apart from Jenkins.jar files? Can't we use Jenkins.jar files? See, Jenkins have both files. Jenkins is having jar file, it's having a var file as well. It's having both kind of files. That means you can use it as a standalone application, or else you can use it as a web application. So we have two things. Okay, so you can use both ways. Okay, but better you go with this kind of var file, because in real time we'll be deploying this application onto some server. Then, so why the reason is we'll be having more users, right? There won't be any one user working on DevOps. We'll be having few more users of DevOps. That means Jenkins. Even they need to access this application. Then how? This way. Okay. So apart from var and jar, is there any other way you can deploy? You can install Jenkins application? Yes. There is one more way. Okay. Yes. So here, first you need to download the Jenkins package. To download Jenkins package. For example, I am working on Linux machine. I'm working on a Linux machine. So if you want to install it, see previously here we are talking about Jenkins.var file. So if you have a Jenkins.var file, we deploy that onto a web server. But that is not installation. That is not installation. So if you want to install it, you need to have a package of Jenkins. You need to have a package of Jenkins. First, download the Jenkins package from Jenkins website. You can start installing it. That's one way. That's one way. Or else I want to install it. See, here we are talking about installations. So previously this is kind of a deployment. This is kind of a deployment. That's a WAR file. But here, if you want to install it, you need to have a package in Linux. And also, if you want to work on Windows, then just download .exe file for Windows. Jenkins.exe file. Okay. So you have many ways you can work on Jenkins. Now, or else, without installing, can I use Jenkins? You can do it. But how? With the help of Docker image. With the help of a Docker image. But we'll see that at the time of Docker. Okay. So these are many ways you can install Jenkins.
Sir, for the master and the slave, we need to install several servers like virtual or.
Yeah. So every slave is a machine. Every slave is a machine. Every slave is a machine. So you need to have different machines for master and the slaves.
For the purpose of slave only executing a task, we need to maintain a machine.
Yes. Okay, the reason is, see, if you have too many jobs running, can master, what if master can't handle it? Then there will be a performance issue. There will be a performance. So I'm not asking you, so I mean, I'm talking about in real time. See, in real time, it's like, see, usually we maintain a separate machines for slaves. So the only reason is the performance issue. Performance issue. Okay. So if there is any performance with Jenkins, see, what I mean performance is, for example, I have an application. I want to build that application. Right? I want to build that application. Now, so you trust me, if you want to build an application, it's going to take minutes, like 20 to 30 minutes, just to perform that application. So just to build that application. Like that, I have two applications. Then are you going to run? Are you going to build the same application? Are you going to run or build the same application on same machine? No, you don't do that. So that's why you need different machines. That's how you can increase the performance of Jenkins.
In the real time, we need to maintain Jenkins for the separate server, SVN
Yes.
for the separate server.
Yes, of course. We maintain different servers. Okay. See, if your organization is really small, If you don't have too much data, you can maintain it on same server, no issues.
Different virtual machine.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to maintain on same virtual machine, you can also maintain it on same virtual machine. But if you have the small size of data, but if the data is huge, then go with different servers. Usually we go with different servers. Okay, usually we go with different servers. Okay,
Virtually or physically?
no issues. Virtually, physically, it's just a machine, right? Just a machine. Virtually or physically, it's just a machine. Or whether it's a cloud, that's also a machine. Everything is a machine. Okay. So whenever I say machine, that's just a machine. That could be on cloud, virtually, or physically, any machine. But why I say physically? Why I said physically means you should understand that that's a machine. The machine can be anywhere, virtual or physical. Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank
So can
you.
you send us